everyone. Peace be with you. My name is Father Michael Joseph Groark. I am a Capuchin Franciscan friar, one of the many ministers who helps out here at the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii, coming to you for this very special Mercoledi Moment. I come to you this week with great news, is that this Sunday, October 4th, Franciscans throughout the world get to celebrate the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, the founder of our movement some 800 years ago. St. Francis of Assisi was a young man who lived in Italy. He came up pretty wealthy and prestigious at the higher end of the social ladder, and after an encounter with Christ and his word, he had a great conversion, and he decided to embrace a life of radical poverty so that he could be very close to people who had no one to be close to. St. Francis of Assisi, I would say, stands for the incarnation of God. He saw the poor and humble Jesus, especially in his birth, his death, and in his continued presence in this Holy Eucharist. And he was so enchanted by the poverty of God that he spent his entire life trying to imitate the poor and humble Christ. We take some of these stories in their lives. For St. Francis, there was one moment when he went out and preached to the birds, and so here we are 800 years later putting him in Grandma's backyard. And on October 4th, we will invite you to bring your pets here for a blessing outside of the church. But I think this does a couple of things to our understanding of the saints, and St. Francis in particular. We take these hyper-miraculous stories, these feel-good stories, and we use them to kind of characterize our saints and satirize them and turn them into bird baths. And we think of St. Francis as kind of this original hippie who was wandering around in the forest most of his life. And I think that does a disservice to us as Christians and devotees of this very complicated, radical saint. This really came alive for me in 2016 when I was privileged to take a pilgrimage to Assisi to actually walk in the footsteps of St. Francis. And one of the many churches that I spent time in was the Basilica of St. Francis. Down in the crypt, the basement of the church, is where the bones of Francis are held. And I spent many days in silent prayer watching hundreds of thousands of pilgrims make their way to this poor man's tomb to offer their prayers and ask for his intercession. And one day I was sitting there and praying and mindlessly watching pilgrims stream towards his crypt, and an interesting group of people arrived all at one time. The first was three women who I'm presuming were of the Hindu tradition. These three women had on these very beautiful saris from head to toe with the bindi mark on their forehead, and they came very piously to the tomb and stood there and offered prayers. And not 2 minutes later, three more women came in full burqa, presumably Muslims, and they stood right next to these Hindu women to offer prayers to St. Francis. And then it got even stranger, because not 2 minutes later, a group of motorcycle bikers in full leather vests and wallet chains and giant beards took their hats off and stood next to these women, and they all bowed in prayer. And I thought, what is it about this poor man from 800 years ago that is capturing the minds and imaginations of people from every faith and every tradition, every walk of life? Certainly it has to be deeper than talking to the birds. And this is true. I think we take our saints and we put them on these pedestals and take these stories and exaggerate them because it gives us a sense of safety. Those saints, they were people almost superhuman, and I could never achieve that kind of holiness. And I think that's missing the point. I think that's a safe Christianity. And St. Francis of Assisi was certainly not a safe saint. And his inspiration is calling us to really go beyond ourselves into the dangerous world of following Christ. And what I mean by that is, St. Francis, more than just talking to birds at one moment in his life, was a saint of radical Christianity. You know, in the book of Ecclesiastes, they say there's nothing new under the sun. Everything we're experiencing today, political strife, war, class divisions, and yes, pandemics, were alive and well in the time of St. Francis of Assisi. You know, the pivotal moment for the life of this saint is when he learned to abandon everything that he was clinging on to of the world, and he leapt headfirst into relationship with the poor and the marginalized. And for him, that was the lepers, the pandemic of his time, the people sick with this disease that everyone else fled from, Francis ran towards. In our own time too, when everything is telling us to keep separate and socially distance and put on masks, for good reason. You know, the CDC wouldn't have been very happy with St. Francis of Assisi, because rather than a face mask, he kissed the leper. Rather than staying distant from those who are suffering, he went to live with them. He's a saint of radical closeness, radical relationship. This is much more than talking to birds. Another way to say this is he was a saint of incarnational living. So what can he speak to us today besides bringing our pets here for a blessing? Well, in this time of being distant and pulled apart and digitally present, what are the ways that St. Francis can inspire us to build church in another way, to be human in another way, to reach out to those who have no one to reach out to them? I pray that on this feast of St. Francis, we may be inspired to live a dangerous Christianity, a Christianity that calls us to go out of ourselves, to live simply so others can simply live, and to be close when everything is telling us to stay far apart. And so I'd like to leave you with a small blessing that St. Francis would give to his brothers. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord let his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look upon you with kindness and give you peace. May St. Francis of Assisi, the dangerous saint, the saint who calls us to be close to one another, intercede for us and pray for us. God bless.